God is enough. You agree? Okay, we'll go home now. No. God is enough. Now, I love the way Lecrae, and I was going to wrap this, but then thought he does a pretty good job. That's supposed to be funny. Anyway, I'm not a rapper, but I love the way he puts the words around to actually focus on the wrong stuff. Now I've got my eyes set on you. I wonder what some of the wrong stuff is that we focus on. Think about that. It's stuff. It's definitely things. It's definitely labels. It's clothing. It's cars. It's houses. It's all sorts of things. It's actually the way we behave as well. There's things around getting our own way. We focus on that sort of stuff. But we come back to that line, God is enough. God is enough. What does that actually mean for us? And how do we get it from our head to our heart? You see, we can say these things and know it's true. Yeah, God is enough. We can say that. Everyone agrees on that. But how it's lived out, for me, is a lot harder anyway. Because I know what's true, and I know it should be that I always trust in God, that He is enough, He's got this covered. But I like to help Him by worrying about things and by giving Him some advice along the way, saying, God, if I was you, I would just turn it around like this. And virtually I'm saying, I am enough. But we actually don't want to live that way. We want to turn it upside down. We want to focus on the right stuff and know that God is enough. Well, that funny word, enough, you know, when you think about it and say it over and over again, it sounds a little bit weird, but we hear it in two different contexts. The first context is one that parents might hear a lot. Just have a look at this picture up on the screen of it could be a bedroom, it could be a house. If that was a room in your house, do you think you'd be using the word enough? Yeah, that is enough. It looks like a teenager's bedroom on a Monday morning. Anyway, but we'd say enough. But we tend to call enough is enough when it's about other people. Enough of that loud music being played next door. Enough of that messy room. Enough of struggling in this relationship. I've had enough of being treated this way. I've just had enough. We know where the line of enough is when it's us and other people, right? We can call it enough, going, I don't want to buy into this anymore. But here's the flip side. When it's about ourselves, we can't see it. It's like it's a blind spot. We give justification around eating a little bit too much. Oh, well, it's just a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And we just go, well, maybe it's spending. Oh, we just spent a little bit. Where did all our money go? Well, a little bit here and a little bit there. We tend to justify, well, that's what we really needed anyway. We find it easier to say enough for other people. It's very hard to say enough for ourselves. And that's the nature of the way we're made up. Our heart is sinful. Our heart justifies our bad behavior. But if we want to know if people have had enough, ask those around you. If you're an employer, ask your employees. What ticks you off? What causes you to say, I've had enough? They say that people don't leave jobs, they leave bad managers. Families. What is it, the behavior that you're putting up with because you love someone, but you wish they would just call it quits and enough is enough? But unless we're willing to have that conversation with each other and be humble enough to hear it for ourselves, we're not going to be able to change our behavior because we have that aspirational thing of we know what's right, we can say the right words, but what we do is really backed up by what we believe. And if we believe that the lies that we tell ourselves that we don't have enough, one day when I have this, I'll have enough. When that's right, that'll be enough. We believe that, and that drives our actions. And it changes the way we look at our world. And instead of being grateful and content, we become discontent. I had an incredible experience leading a missions trip, a family missions trip to Thailand. I hadn't been on mission trips before and decided it was really about me giving to other people. We were going to a local school in Chiang Mai, and I've got an educationalist by background, and so I was willing to get alongside the English teacher and help them teach and show a new way of the fact that kids could teach kids. That was totally new in Thailand. And so I had parents and children with me, and we were heading into this classroom, heading into the school. So we went in all bright that first morning. We'd get up, ready to go. And I walked into a classroom, and I had this moment. I looked at the walls, and I'm going, okay, something was different about the walls of these classrooms compared to my classroom. There was nothing on the walls. There was no posters, nothing. In fact, they were dirty, and all I wanted to do was to get a cloth and start cleaning. And not that I'm a clean freak, but just clean the walls. I just wanted something. And then I looked at the around the shelves, and I expected to see equipment that the kids could play with. There was a pile of books about that high and a few pencils. That was it. And I'm going, what? How can they teach? How can they do anything? And so in me, I was wanting to go, I will help you. I've got resource. Let's decorate your room. Let's get you some things. And I spoke to the head of English, and she was so gracious because she said to me, no, we don't need things for our walls. We don't need equipment. We need food for our children. They were coming to school without food. And somehow the school had to provide food for these children so they could learn. So it was like there was that zone, that enough zone. I was wanting to top it up, but there was something in the foundation that I hadn't seen because I was looking at through the lens of what I thought was enough. I went out to the playground thinking that I'd learnt all my lessons. I thought, right, let's play, let's do something. Okay, where are the balls? Where's the bat? There's a playground. Go, let's go find it. The kids took me to the playground. It was an old ute parked in the corner of the playground, which is all concrete, by the way. And I looked at this ute and going, that's your playground? Yeah. So they climb up on the top. Come with us, miss, come with us. What do? You go with them. Climb up on the top, and then you had just to slide down the windshield onto the bonnet and off. That was the slide. They'd taken out the windscreen wipers to make it a faster ride. And then in the other area in the playground, there was tyres. You could roll around tyres. But you come and you're totally covered in black when you get in from playing. There was a challenge for me. I thought the solution was all these other things. But actually hearing what they needed was something different. My lens had to change. Now, I really have loved the journey over 8 years connecting with the school time and time again. And in that time, we have decorated the room. We have provided play equipment. We have given other things that the kids could use to learn and understand. But it comes on top of the sponsorship for our kids in that school to have food. You see, you can't help them learn if they haven't got anything in their tummies. Now, there comes a lens that we need to look to around what we have. When we look at our resources, we can say, oh, we don't have enough. We need a little bit more of this and a little bit more of that. But the reality is when we look at what we have, we see that we have enough. God has given us a lot. We live in such a wealthy environment, yet not everybody has everything that they need. Yet we could share that. We could share. We could actually help people. We could be proactive in this space. As a school teacher, it wasn't here in New Zealand. It's not the fact that we don't have equipment. We don't have nice rooms. But I knew that at the beginning of the school year, as kids come in, there'd be 2 or 3 children in my class that would make up excuses for not having the right school books. So he'd come and say, so when are you going to bring your school books? Have you got them? Oh, yes. My mum's going today. Tomorrow, nothing. Oh, grandma's going to get that. Nothing. Now, what I knew is time and time again, these kids were making excuses because they didn't have enough. And as a teacher, I would just say, hey, look, the stationery's turned up. It just came. Look at this. It's got your name on it. It must be yours. And the look of delight on their face, whoa! You see, we have enough, we have resource, but the lens that we use helps us to see the need elsewhere. See, I believe that we as a church could make a difference too. You know, in our kids' space environments, our children are getting the back to school challenge. Now, if you don't have primary school age kids, it doesn't mean you can't participate. But here I'm suggesting that we involve kids in this and go, what if we could bring a little bit extra and bring it here and make up some backpacks? What if out of our enough and overflow, could we take some things and go, look, I can buy an extra pencil. I can give that away to someone else. What if we could be that resource to somebody? You know, sometimes we don't think about these things because the lens is around our own life and our own circumstance. Sometimes I think it's important for us to lift our eyes and to see what is around us. Because we can get caught in this trap where we see what we don't have, and that becomes a discontent zone. We put it this way, the difference between what we have and what we don't have is discontent. Because we're focusing on the wrong stuff. If we focus on what we do have, that changes the way we see life. You know, the founder of Farmers, Robert Laidlaw, made an agreement with God that he would give a percentage of his income away. He decided what he needed was enough and said, anything I make above that, I'm going to give it back. I'm going to give it away. I'm going to resource or give away the resource that I have. And there's data around and narrative around the fact it went from 10%, which we know is a tithe, that's in a church, and it's our joy to be able to give out of our resource in that way. And it grew higher and higher percentage, 25, 50, and there's even some narrative that said it was even more. The amount doesn't matter as much as the principle. He decided what he could live on and what he needed, what was enough, and said, anything else, God, you bless me with, I'm going to give that away. Now, how much harder would it be to wait to see it come in and then try and give it away, rather than to make the decision and then out of my enough, I'm going to give out of that to bless other people? You see, it's like this. It's something that we can test God in because He is more than enough. He's promised that. He's promised that He will look after us. He's promised that the things that we pursue will take us in one direction, but when we pursue Him, that's a different story. Seek first His kingdom, and what's the next part of the verse? And yes, His righteousness, and these things will be added unto you. In other words, put Him first, that God is enough. Live out of that mindset, that lens over our lives, and then see what a difference we can achieve. See what a difference God can do in us and then through us. We had a family in a church that we pastored a few years ago, and they would say to me, Marg, we don't have enough. They were focusing on the stuff that they didn't have. Now, in fairness, they didn't have a lot. But I believe in this principle so much. I said, what if you turn that around and say, God, we're grateful, and we start off and we start giving, say, $2 a week. What say if we start there, start somewhere that's achievable? And that's not even a cup of coffee these days. So what is it that we could start with? And here the journey, we saw it unfold. It was so exciting because out of what they said they didn't have, they changed their lens and said, we have enough. We have enough to give that little bit. They got frustrated with a little bit and said, oh, what the heck? We're going to go for the 10% because we think that's what God is saying to us. They took that step of faith, and it was after a little while they said, hey, our kids haven't been to the doctor for a while, and they used to be always there. We actually have more than we thought we had. They had this big light bulb moment. And what it was they'd changed their focus from the wrong stuff to the fact that God is enough. Now that enough goes through our financial situation. It goes through our relational. What about friendship? What about the friendships? We know we need friends. Sometimes our pursuit of something like that is so aggressive that we actually turn people away, but we're so fixated on it. What say if we first had friendship with God, and out of that we took our friendship with other people? Now, it's not that we don't do and have an effort, but it's we actually have our focus, what drives us, what motivates us. That's what changes. So when we say God is enough, that's our foundation. And out of there, we can live that different way. So what do you pursue? What consumes you? For some people, it's about promotion. For some people, it's all about being accepted. Now, nobody likes being rejected, but sometimes some of our behaviours that are causing others to go, well, that's enough of that controlling or that this or that, that's coming from that place, that blind spot that we're actually pursuing. But it's others can see it before we recognise it. So if you want to have a bold conversation this afternoon, why don't you ask your family, what ticks you off? When is enough when it comes to me? And be bold to listen to it. I don't like those conversations very much, but they're so helpful and they're so needed. Imagine the life change that could come from that when we come face to face with something that is driving us. It may be a little bit like Jesus' encounter with Zacchaeus. Can you actually look for me in your Bibles to Luke chapter 19? As I've been looking closely at this, now we could probably rattle off that narrative and go, this is the story, Luke chapter 19, verses 1 through to 9. Now, we could probably rattle it off, but when you look down a little bit deeper, you see some significant pieces that we might miss. But these pieces will help us understand what it is to have God as enough. You see, this story wasn't just told by Luke as, oh, I know this story. This story was retold by Luke, but he was told this by Zacchaeus himself. Now, we know this because of the depth of the detail that he goes into. No one else would probably care what sort of tree it was, but it was like Zacchaeus saying, oh, you've got to understand the full picture. You see, we can pick up a lot of what this life was like for Zacchaeus in just a few lines. As we start to read in verse number 1, Jesus entered Jericho and has made his way through the town. There was a man there named Zacchaeus, and he was a chief tax collector in the region. He had become very rich, and he wanted to see Jesus. You see, now, he was a tax collector. But you see, he was a chief tax collector. He was not just his ordinary, everyday person. He was good at what he did. He could get the money. He knew where to go, and he was somebody that sacrificed friendships and other connections, relationships, respect, because he was pursuing something. You see, the Roman rule, they knew that they didn't actually exile the Israelites out of that space. They said the way to actually work this is to just tax people. Let them stay where they are and tax them heavily. That way the Romans get rich and the people can stay where they were. And not everyone is happy with that scenario. But see, they knew they had to find somebody or some people to be tax collectors because they knew where the money was. And it was, imagine this sort of scenario where Zacchaeus would know where the money was. He knew what your household, he knew how many cattle were parked in your backyard, and he knew where the money was. And so he could actually go after you and work on Roman instruction to go and grab taxes from you and tax you heavily. But it wasn't just that tax, because you see, others would come to him and go, Zacchaeus, you know that I've got money. Would you not tell anybody? Okay, would you not tell anybody? Just let that go under the radar. I'll pay you a little bit. So Zacchaeus would take that payment, but he would go and tell anyway. He would double cross because he was pursuing something that wasn't enough for him. He wanted more and more and more. You can imagine his wealth just expanding and expanding. And with that comes the friendships had gone, and he didn't care anymore. That was his lot, but he was rich. And that gave him status. But you see, it's out of that comes this context. He wanted to see Jesus. That gives us a little window into this that said maybe things weren't as rosy as what he thought. Maybe the pursuit of enough wasn't having that same buzz for him anymore. He wanted to see Jesus. So he made a decision in verse 3. He tried to get a look at Jesus, but he was too short to see over the crowd. The crowd certainly weren't favorable of him and didn't want to help him. So he ran ahead and climbed up a sycamore fig tree beside the road, for Jesus was going to pass that way. Now you say that so quickly. He ran ahead, climbed up a tree. That's no big deal. It's a massive deal. He was a man who had dignity. He was one that people looked and go, oh, he had the money, honey, he had the look, the feel. If you were a man of status like that, whether you're liked or not, you never ran. You walked everywhere. It was undignified to run, let alone hitch up your robe and climb up a tree. So understand that Zacchaeus is there. He's giving this detail because this is what drove him. He didn't actually care then about what other people were thinking of him. He wanted to get up the tree because his desire to see Jesus was overriding that which he had been pursuing in the past. But nothing had changed for him yet. You see, the novelty for the things we pursue wears off. It doesn't give us the same buzz that it used to. That's the insidious nature of enough. It never comes. There's no point in life that we go, there is enough. That is enough. There's always more and more and more we need. That's why we need to change the lens that we see our life through, to measure it differently. Well, see, when Jesus came by, Zacchaeus was right there close. He could see him. He stopped and he looked up and called Zacchaeus by name. He said, quick, come down. I must be a guest in your home today. So imagine having your name called. Now, it's not that name, have you ever had your mum or somebody call your name that has that edge to it and you know you're in trouble? Yeah? Yeah, I know when my name said in trouble. It's not that sort of trouble. It was like that warmth of, I know you, I see you. You're not going past my lens. I can see you there. I know that you're there. Zacchaeus hadn't had that before. Something was strange and weird in that for him. He didn't expect Jesus to stop and call him by name. But understand what he'd done and the fact that Jesus still called him. Hey, that brings us encouragement. As we push pause there for our lives, you may have cheated, you may have stolen, you may be a grumpy person, you may have done this and that, you may have burnt these relational bridges, you may not have been as caring as what you ought to have been. All of these falling short things, none of that stops Jesus from calling your name. None of that's a barrier for Jesus. And when I think about that, I just go, because actually only he knows the depth of some of the things I've pursued. Only he knows some of the thought processes of what looks good on the outside but underneath driven by something that's not as wholesome and it's shameful. But you know what? Jesus looked at Zacchaeus, called him by name and said, come down, and then I'm going to your home. And it's one of those moments that, seriously, Jesus, what are you thinking? Now, sometimes when Jesus said things, some of the crowd were going, yeah, and others were going, boo, boo, boo. It was like dividing loyalties all around. You either liked it, and then some of it, others didn't. So there's always a mix. But this is the only time that I've found in the New Testament when all of the people, according to this narrative, were not happy with that. No one was happy with the fact of Jesus' choice to go to Zacchaeus' house. They were going, don't you understand? Don't you understand? There's lots of people who you could go and spend time with, and you choose him because he'd ripped everybody off. But that's just exactly who Jesus wanted to spend time with. So in verse 6, we carry on the story and we read that Zacchaeus quickly climbed down and took Jesus to his house. In great excitement and joy, the people were displeased. He'd gone to the guest of a notorious sinner, and they grumbled. And boy, did they grumble. You can imagine the thoughts going through Zacchaeus' mind as they were heading that way of, oh, what do I have? What am I going to do? What do I tell my wife? Suddenly I brought someone home for dinner. Now it could be anybody. She's never had friends come home because we don't have any. But just all of this buzzing around. Now we don't know what happened in that conversation, but we know what happened as a result of it. But there's still some things to learn here in verse 8. They'd been having this conversation, and meanwhile, Zacchaeus stood before the Lord and said, I will give half my wealth to the poor. Lord, if I've cheated people on their taxes, and he had, I will give them back 4 times as much. Now, it wasn't unusual for a host to stand up and address a guest. That was normal protocol. But normally he would stand up and say, Jesus, thank you for coming and enjoying this meal with us, and speak something to him, speak positively to him. But it was like Zacchaeus had this in his heart, and he just stood up, and it was like, it just blurted out. It was just go, something's changing, and I've got to get it out there. And I've ripped people off, and I know I have. Here's what I'm going to do. Can you imagine who else might have been around the table? Did he have kids? Did he have a wife that's going, hang on a minute, we haven't discussed this. This is about our financial situation. I don't want to downscale. I'm not part of this. It doesn't seem to care. And in fact, we were interested to have pillow talk and to find out what was actually said in that situation. It was like Zacchaeus had this inside of him that goes, Jesus, I've been with you and things have changed. I can't put it into words, but it's going to affect the way I behave. It's going to affect what comes from me. You see, it's not the aspirational. It's not just the articulated word. It's actually what he believes. That had changed. And then I love Jesus' response. He stands and talks back to Zacchaeus. Now again, that was also protocol. And normally it was, why, thank you for having me. He didn't even go there. He declared over him, salvation has come to this home today. I love it. Salvation, healing, hope has come to this man today. He's shown himself to be a true son of Abraham. Now the reality is, for an Israelite to hear that, the son of Abraham was a real honor. I guess Zacchaeus had been called the son of a lot of other things, but not Abraham. He had the greatest honor bestowed upon him because Jesus said, you're family, we're together. I'm for you, I'm with you. I see past what you've been doing. I see a future. I see that which you don't see right now. This changed everything for him. I don't think Zacchaeus would ever have forgotten that moment. I would have loved to find out, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, what had happened. We don't actually hear much of Zacchaeus anymore. Not through the Bible anyway. But what I can imagine that has happened, and it's highly likely, is he went back to being a tax collector. But this time, he was an honest tax collector. And that was probably one of the biggest oxymorons of the time. You couldn't be honest and a tax collector. But Zacchaeus was changed. Things were different. You see, I don't think God wants us to be plucked out of our current situation. I think he wants to work through that. I think with a change of lens, he will show us that which we couldn't even imagine. Zacchaeus having friends, people speaking favorably of him, that's just not been part of his story until now. He'd been healed over the greed, the more desire. He'd been taken off the treadmill of not enough, not enough, not enough, not enough. And he discovered that in Jesus he had enough. And then that which was on top became overflow, and he could bless other people. I think that's what God wants for us as a church. I think that's what God wants us for individuals, to not be so focused on what we don't have, but to be generous, to realize that he is enough, even for that painful relationship, those horrible things that you're working through. He is enough. He's actually more than enough, if we believe it. It's kind of like taking a cup And instead of just having a little bit and go, oh, there's more, I need more, I need more. It's like Jesus saying to us today, it's full. And it's not just full because of what you do. It's full because of who I call you to be. And it actually is overflowing. And the things that overflow from you are not the horrible things that people say, enough is enough of that behavior. But it's the things that bless and nourish other people. I want to be someone like that. I don't want to have the horrible narrative of things around the choices that I made because I'm pursuing significance or I'm pursuing this or that. I don't want to be a parent that hasn't time for my family because I'm too busy doing other things. I want to be a person who lives out of the overflow of enough. And my God is enough. See, here's the deal. Often we try and make room for God. God actually said, I want you to know I made room for you before you even knew me. His love and His grace He gave to us and said, I am enough for you. And I want you to live in that zone. I want you to change your lens from that pursuing, that discontent, to a place where you can be an influencer because you're living out of the abundance of what I've given. And for some of you, it will be financial abundance. For some of you, it won't. Some of you, it will be relational abundance. For some of you, you'll be saying, well, it's nothing much, but it means everything to somebody else who benefits from the overflow of that. Just even the last week, I was in the supermarket and you know how you're doing your self-checkout thing and it comes up, assistance needed, and everything and me was wanting to go, if the system worked, I wouldn't need assistance. I haven't done anything wrong. And the lady came over and I'm going, I'm probably just one of these million customers that stuffed something up, but can you help me out here? And she said, well, thank you. She said, I get yelled at so often during the day. And I'm going, wow. Thank you, God, for pulling in my attitude just right then. And I'm not saying I'm perfect. I wish I was. But I just want to be real for you and real with you and saying God can work over the abundance of what He places in us. And others can be blessed by the things we think are just insignificant. But they are great when He applies that to us. You see, God promises us His faithfulness. We have confidence that we're in His hands. Imagine going through stuff that's just tough and you just know that God is with you. Imagine for some of you who have teenagers, young people who have walked away from their faith. Some of us have adult children who have walked away from their faith. And you're going, God, I can't do anything more. I can't. And He goes, you can keep praying. Out of enough, you're still in my hands. This is my confidence. I want you to be confident in that. You see, God's never failed us in the past and He never will in the future. So what needs to change for you in order to live out of that enoughness? To focus on what God would be saying today. What's the Holy Spirit saying to you? We tune our ear to Him. Honestly, it may be hard. You may be wanting to justify. That would make you human. But here's the thing. If we will but listen and allow God to speak to us, we can have that transformational experience that Zacchaeus had. That will come from, this is how I want to live differently. Not because of anything we've done, but because what God's done for us. Sometimes I find it helpful when I'm reflecting on things to make a declaration. Sometimes it's words, sometimes I'm a very kinesthetic learner around things that we do. So I wondered whether it might be helpful in our reflection space, whether you might find it helpful to come and pick up a cup and go, God, this is my life. This is my life. you are enough. You might even want to take another cup and remind yourself that God keeps pouring into you. More of His love, more of His grace. A second chance, because nothing stops Jesus from loving us. If that will be helpful for you, and you surrender that thing that you've been pursuing and say, now, I want to change that. God can do amazing things in that moment for you. We can think very generally, but I actually want you to go really specifically. Because we can be generalized and go, oh, yeah, but that's part of our justification. What is it that you're pursuing that if it was put on the screen, you'd be embarrassed by? You've got it, I've got it. Here's the deal. That's not too big for Jesus. So as we sing and as we reflect, I'd invite you to just come. No one's going to worry if you just move past them to come to a pool either side. And if you'd like someone to pray with you, there'll be a prayer team just further out there. We are willing to pray for you. Sometimes you just need that affirmation over you. You may want to do your business with God right where you are, but we're going to take a moment to remember that God is with us, that He is for us. He's never failed us. And the mountains that He's moved in the past for others, the mountains that seem like there's no way through, He makes a way when there is no way. Who would have thought? Who would have thought Zacchaeus would ever have changed his ways? I think Zacchaeus would never have thought. But here he is, retelling his story to Luke, who shared it with us because it matters, because God's still in the business of transformation. Let's stand together and I'll pray over us and then we'll have our time of reflection. Father, thank you for every single person standing before you. And it's like that moment where Zacchaeus stood up and wanted to say something to you. We want to say something to you today as your people. We want to hear those words that say you are a son of Abraham, a daughter of Sarah, that you are my child because I loved you and still love you. I gave my life for you and you have worth. God, would you help us to deal with the things that we pursue because we believe it's not enough? God, help us to turn that round and be a people who are generous, who receive from you and then are willing to let that flow out to others. We declare today that you are enough for us, for our situation, yesterday, today, and forever.